Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to welcome you to the Team Tuesdays webinar. My name is Kristen Lenig, and I am the Central Field Director for Special Olympics Pennsylvania. I will be your host today during this webinar. My teammate, Haley Fusak, who is the SOPA Marketing and PR Manager, will be operating the webinar. Throughout this webinar, your microphones will be muted and your video cameras disabled. At the end of the speaker presentation, we will have a brief time for questions. These questions can be submitted through the chat box. This webinar will be recorded and posted to our SOPA YouTube channel where you can view later and share with others. As a reminder, the purpose of this webinar is to connect with all of you and share helpful and motivational content to continue our mission. Thank you all of you for joining us today. We are very excited to present a special guest speaker during this webinar, Dr. Jared Spencer. But first, we will begin with Matt Aaron, our President and CEO of Special Olympics Pennsylvania.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all had a great weekend. It's wonderful to see we've got good participation on the webinar today. Something that we did on previous webinars was introduce you to some of our board members. On the first call, we had Sue Paterno with us. The last call, we had Johanna Schoenig, who is an athlete from Lycoming County, and she's also our board secretary. And today, I'm pleased that we have Jim Wenner with us. Jim is our board chair. I think many of you probably know Jim from previous competition events, but Jim is the head of IT for Sheets. He's been on the board for almost 9 years. His third 3-year term will end in December, at which time he'll hit his term limit and roll off the board. But Jim is with us today to share a few words with everybody. Jim, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Matt. Really happy to be here with everyone today. Glad to join you today from Huntington County, just below Center County. Looking forward to our Birth Summer Games, which is open to all of our, so many people can participate in that. And just really want to thank the athletes, our coaches, all the volunteers, and the SOPA professional staff for keeping it forward in this 50th year of Special Olympics in Pennsylvania. And I really like these team meetings because we do achieve more together, keep the movement going. So looking forward to hearing from you today. Thank you all for joining, and from the board, I really appreciate everything that you all are doing to keep Special Olympics at the forefront. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. And one final note, something that I've been working with Jim and the other members of our executive committee on is our virtual summer games, which you know are coming up on June 12th to 14th. We're really excited about it, but we also need your help. Our goal this year is to double the number of athletes participating. We can't be together in person this year, but our goal is to get at least 4,000 athletes involved in the virtual summer games. As of this morning, we only had about 200 athletes who had signed up so far, and that's okay because we wanted everyone practicing the challenge activities before scores are due on the 31st. So with just about a little less than a week to go, we got a lot of work to do. So earlier today, we announced some incentives. The first 500 athletes who register will get a virtual Summer Games t-shirt. We have $100 gift cards for the top 5 coaches. And we have incentives for the local programs that get the largest percentage of their athletes registered. So I hope for all of our management team members out there and our coaches on the webinar today, please help us to encourage participation. As I said, our goal is to double participation to 4,000. So please help us hit that goal. Thanks. Haley and Kristen, back to you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Jim. We are very excited to see all of our athletes participating in our first virtual summer games. I would now like to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Jared Spencer, who is a sports psychologist, speaker, author, and consultant. Dr. Spencer is president and founder of Mind of the Athlete, which is a sports psychology company committed to improving the emotional health of athletes. Dr. Jared Spencer serves as the sports psychologist for individual professional athletes and several college and professional teams, including teams at Princeton University, Lehigh University, and University of Maryland. Dr. Spencer was also an all-state high school wrestler who captained his team to back-to-back New Jersey state championships. While in college, he was a record-setting tailback for the Lafayette College football team. Additionally, while attending graduate school at Westchester University, he played wing on their rugby team. Good afternoon, Dr. Spencer. Thank you for joining us.
It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Great, great. You have quite the background in sports, so I know a lot of our athletes will be able to ask you questions about that and relate to you on that. But I'm very excited to talk to you today about your professional background and working with athletes in the sports psychology field.
For sure. I can't wait to share this information with you all.
We'd like to start first with just learning a little bit more about you and how you got into the sports psychology field, a little bit more about your background and experience.
Sure. Well, I live in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, and as such, I'm a sports psychologist locally here and then throughout the state, but I fell into the career as a sports psychologist, like many people, realizing that when you compete as an athlete, there's a lot of emotional highs, but there are also a lot of emotional lows. And too often in life, people don't really give us the skill sets to manage that roller coaster emotionally that we go through as athletes. I also realized along the journey that when I did learn more about the mind and I did have some tools in my mental toolbox to manage the pressure cooker, I was actually able to thrive and access parts of myself and ability that I never even realized were there. So it's become a real joy in life to thus in turn help other people to unlock their fullest potential by giving them the skills to manage their minds.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of everything, the foundation? So what is mental health and why is that important?
Well, I think whole health really starts with mental health. And that's the 6 inches between your ears. When we talk about mental health, we are talking about what are you thinking and what are you feeling? And primarily focused on what are you thinking, what are you doing, that can really alter the way that we ultimately express ourselves in life. So mental health is really the key to whole health.
Great, great. Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about some practices to maintain good mental health?
Well, I think the biggest factor in mental health is really sleep. And that's probably a topic we'll unpack deeply through our time together today. But the more well-rested we are, the more consistent our sleep is, the better we tend to feel and the clearer our minds tend to be. So one of the biggest things is that. The second is, hanging around positive people. As you hang around people that energize you, that inspire you, that have a good, positive dynamic with you, we all tend to elevate our game. And that means our mood, our emotions, our interactions, our thoughts. So in addition to sleep, hanging out with good, positive people is a big factor for mental health.
That's a great thing to think about. A lot of people I think don't think about those things, and kind of, correlation with that, talking about mental health, how does that affect an athlete's performance, but not just an athlete individually, their team cohesion, working together as a team, and even the success with their coaches. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think the hallmark to any human interaction that's successful is really positive dynamics. And dynamics is kind of a word used to describe that interaction style, the communication that goes beyond just the words. It's a vibe, it's a feeling, it's a look, it's the transparency, it's the trust. And those type of dynamics, when they're really working well, and they're mutually supportive and uplifting, what we tend to see is that an individual will find that they're the emotionally healthier version of themselves, and they tend to be able to navigate stress and tension a little bit better. They tend to smile a little bit more. They tend to radiate good vibes. And consequently, the people that get to experience that dynamic really seem to have more emotional resolve and better physical performance.
Very true, very true. Thank you for that. We want to talk to you a little bit more about any kind of mental health concerns that you might see arise during this pandemic. Can we talk a little bit about that? I know we talked about some key pillars of success with mental health, but can you kind of, like you said, unpack that a little bit and talk about mental health, not only just with our athletes and, you know, in sports, but just during this time especially?
You know, Kristen, this is a really significant time in human history for all of us. And the truth is that the pandemic has caused incredible economic challenges. Of course, the most significant is the medical and getting the coronavirus, which I hope none of us on this Zoom call or watching this has experienced. But the other part that's not really being talked about, which touches every person, is really the mental health aspects. And what I've noticed over the last few weeks of the pandemic is that the big things that people are struggling with are anxiety, which is fear of the unknown. The second is stir craziness. I'm just tired of being cooped up and I need to go out and do something. The third is strained relationships. You know, I love you, but you're driving me crazy. Or maybe it's the reverse, like, you love me, but I'm driving you crazy, right? And so strained relationships as we quarantine with a small group of people is another one. Another main pillar that I'm seeing people struggle with is something that I refer to as the funk. The funk is more used as a kind of a pop culture slang term to describe a low-grade depression. It's not a full depressive episode, but it's just, you know, some days you just wake up and you don't really feel motivated. You don't feel energetic. You don't feel like you got it. And you just feel like you're in a bit of a funk. And so that seems to be a lot more common than people realize. And then last is insomnia. You know, people are saying to me all the time, like, I just had difficulty making it through the whole night without waking up or tossing and turning and thinking about things. So insomnia, the fun, relationships, those are just a few of the main pillars that we're seeing out there.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit more? I know you said we could talk for an hour on just this topic, so obviously we don't want to do that. But can you tell us a little bit more about how does sleep actually impact your mental health?
Yeah, so, you know, when you want to talk about how sleep impacts any mental health, just ask any parent who has had a newborn baby in the house and how difficult it is to think clearly or have emotional patience when you get a newborn baby in the house. So that's one of the best examples of how we know sleep impacts mental health. But in particular, what I think you're really asking for and what people want to hear is, give me something I can do to make me sleep a little bit better. And here's the key. It's about the consistency of your sleep. And especially during a pandemic when we might not have the same routine every day, we've really got to find a way to go to bed every day at the same time and wake up around the same time as well. And there's a way you can find out how to fall asleep each night. According to Dr. Nick Hall, he said that each night there's a big yawn that we all experience. Oh man, I'm getting tired. And an hour after that yawn is when you would ideally fall asleep each night. And once that yawn occurs, it becomes very important to have no electronics in front of your face at that time. You see, the biggest problem in our culture and society is 90% of the people I poll are actually lying in bed with their cell phone in front of their face. So while their brain's trying to release melatonin, the chemical that helps us fall asleep, the blue light from the phone is blocking the melatonin. And in addition, the things that we're looking at on social media are really activating our brain and eliciting strong emotions. So what happens is most people blow by that time they would ideally fall asleep, and then they're up for about another hour and a half. Again, another bad habit of just lying in bed and looking at the electronic even longer. You might miss the next big wave, which would come about an hour and a half later. So to everyone out there, one of the best things you could do is hit the same mark every night. Pay attention to the big yawn tonight. You'll know exactly when you should fall asleep. And when the yawn comes, no more electronics.
Very good advice to all of us, I'm sure. Great. Can you tell us a little bit more about recognizing maybe someone who's experiencing depression during this time? If there are people in their within their family, or just people maybe you're seeing at work, if people are out there still working, some just common symptoms to recognize depression, and then maybe any tips or advice of how you can help them?
Yeah, depression is simply this: hurt held inward. When you hold emotional hurt inward, you're either going to implode, which isn't really good, or explode, which isn't really good. And so more commonly, when we see somebody who's emotionally hurting, the socially acceptable emotion to emote and to express is anger. So when you see somebody who's angry, just know that they're emotionally hurting, and they're probably exploding. And so what we want to look for is anger. We want to look for irritability. We want to look for mood fluctuation. We want to find people beginning to break away. That's a little bit more of an advanced symptom, meaning like, I don't want to hang out with anybody. I just want to be left alone. And that's a significant red flag. And so we also want to look for decreased interest in things that were formerly pleasurable, but now for whatever reason, we just don't have that same drive or motivation. And so it's okay to experience some of these symptoms, and we all do. They're normal, they're natural. But when they reach a level that's beyond the funk, and they really start to interfere with our everyday social, psychological activity, particularly for about 2 weeks, that's when we really say a person might be battling some clinical depression.
And Dr. Spencer, can you tell us a little bit, for our athletes that are on the call, or even our coaches on the call, when you see fellow people on your team, whether it is athletes or coaches that maybe aren't, showing some symptoms like this, or acting a little differently than normal? Obviously, I think a lot of us are during the pandemic in general, but if they do recognize those things, what's some ways they can help each other? I know that there's a lot of things you can probably do, but what's some ways you would suggest to be a better support?
Yeah, first thing we want to do is validate. We never want to minimize or dismiss another person's emotions. First thing we want to do is validate, like, you have every right to feel that way. That's this pandemic is really tough. The next thing we want to do is empathize. Like, I'm so sorry that you're going through that right now. That must be very difficult for you. The next one is encourage. Like, hey, you're going to get through this. It's going to happen. And the last is support, which is really, I'm with you and I'm here for you. And if there's anything I can do for you, just let me know. So validate, empathize, and encourage and support. So validate, empathize, encourage, and support. VIS is kind of the nickname, but that's exactly how we should approach anybody who's struggling with a little depression.
Wonderful. Those are wonderful ideas right there. So I think our coaches are definitely, and athletes probably definitely taking notes on that. Now, to talk a little bit more about our athletes, can you tell us a little bit about confidence? I know that's another key thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how an athlete's confidence could help them be a better performer?
Well, you see, confidence by definition is really the depth of self-belief that you have the skills necessary to achieve the desired goal. So the depth of your self-belief. And that's really the wild card right there, because for many individuals, like, yeah, they believe that they have the skills necessary, but how deep does that self-belief go? Now, what's interesting about confidence is really a byproduct of a positive experience. So when you have a positive experience, your confidence can grow. And so let me give you a personal example about this. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had a wrestling match against the returning state champion. And my job out there was one thing: just don't go get out there and get pinned. So in the first 30 seconds of the match, I was a sophomore and I shot in on the senior. I got in really deep on his legs and I actually drove him out of bounds. And the crowd went wild. And we went back to the center of the circle and people are thinking to themselves, like, who's this unknown sophomore that's taking it to our state champion, right? Like, we got ourselves a match here. Well, when I got back to the center of the circle, I looked at the state champion and boy, oh boy, did he look mad. Ooh. And within a minute, that guy had me twisted up like a pretzel in the center of the mat. And I heard the referee slap the mat, indicating that I had been pinned. I didn't even get out of the first period with the state champion. So I was devastated because obviously I felt like I let my team down and I didn't achieve my goal of just not getting pinned. But after that match, my coach, Bob Jurley, said something to me that day that forever changed my life. And I think it's going to change the life of many of our athletes and coaches today too. Here's what he said. In front of the whole team, rather than say something critical or negative to me, he said to me this: Jared, if you can get in that deep on a state champion's leg, you can get in that deep on anybody that you wrestle the rest of your life, because nobody's going to be as good as that guy. You know, I thought about it the rest of the night, and he was right. I did get in on his leg, and he is the best. So when I went to practice the next day, I looked at the seniors on the team and I said, well, you're not as good as that guy, so I know I can at least get in on your leg. You see, my coach took one small positive aspect of an experience and he highlighted it. And by doing so, that gave me authentic, real confidence for that one part of what's called shooting a takedown in wrestling. So consequently, I began to feel very confident I can get in on anybody. And then eventually I learned to what's called turn the corner, lift a leg up in the air, or finish a takedown. So that by the time I became a senior in high school, I had a lot of success wrestling on my feet and taking people down. And I attribute it all to one coach one day who could have been critical, but because he highlighted one small positive aspect of my performance, he genuinely increased my confidence. That's how good coaches really do.
What an incredible story. I loved hearing that. And I want to follow up on that. So obviously, the athlete having confidence is so key in the story you told us, and I know our athletes can definitely relate to that. Do you think it's just as important for the coach to have that confidence in the athlete? Do you think it goes either direction? Is there one more important than the other? One needs to come first when it comes to the athlete's individual confidence versus the coach's confidence in the athlete or in the team?
Kristen, that's a brilliant question. And quite frankly, you know, here's the best answer I have for you on that. So I'm aware of a research article that actually showed the most important component is whether or not the athlete thinks that the coach actually believes in them. And so if the athlete thinks like, oh, my coach doesn't really believe in me, that's a problematic dynamic. And you're not going to get the best performance out of that athlete. But if the athlete conversely says, wow, my coach really believes in me. He thinks I'm really good. I'm talented. He thinks I could win this race. That is the biggest variable. And so it's all about from the athlete's perspective. So the coach, now let's look at this from the coach's angle. The coach may say, no, I think that the athlete knows I believe in them. That's not going to work. And so, as my friend JoJo's mom said, you got to know that you know that you know. And so, you know, you want that coach to know that they know that they know that that athlete thinks they believe in them, right? And so that's really where We want to increase confidence, that depth of experience, that belief, knowing that the athlete believes the coach believes in them.
Great, great. And on the mindset of the coach as well, Dr. Spencer, do you think that with the coach having confidence in themselves, that they will be a better leader in general? Is that something that they should also be working towards?
Actually, no. Sometimes we see coaches that really believe in themselves, but they're, quite frankly, they're narcissistic, and they know that they were really good, but that sometimes comes across as arrogance. So really, humility would be the hallmark trait you really want to see in a coach, and who's really making it about the athlete, not themselves. And too often, too many parents or the coaches, their emotional reactions get so entangled in the athlete's performance that it becomes actually counterproductive. And so the coach may believe in themselves or their coaching skills. That's healthy, that's wise. There's a healthy degree of narcissism. But when it reaches too much, I think we've all seen people like that we know it's not optimal.
Wonderful. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said think about the athlete perspective. Who we here for? It's for the athletes, and that is definitely something in Special Olympics that we are definitely centered towards that mindset. I want to also ask you about the pandemic putting some strain on family relationships. I know you briefly touched on that earlier, and talking about people spending a lot of time together right now in very close quarters sometimes, and with the extra stress and anxiety of this situation. What are some strategies that you would suggest for our families to help them lessen that strained relationship?
Well, I think one of the keys is this. There are things that people are doing in your house, meaning you, everybody listening to this, that are kind of annoying you. And in that case, you obviously want to address that with the individual, but you want to do it by coming at it in a roundabout way. And so I encourage you to go to that family member and just say, hey, is there anything that I'm doing that's kind of annoying you? And can you make me aware of that? Because I want to try to work on that, and I want to try to make the adjustments necessary so, we could all live in peace a little bit more. And many people would be happy that you've done that and say, oh, that's great. Yeah, actually, this is annoying me. And if you just, for example, maybe something as simple as like, put your dishes in the dishwasher, just don't load them in the sink, because then I have to move them into the dishwasher. It could be something as simple as that. So I do think that's the way to come at it, because then ultimately what you can then do after that conversation is say to the individual, hey, while we're at it, there is one thing that you've been doing that kind of really is irking me. I know it may not seem like a big deal, but for whatever reason, it bothers me, and this is what you're doing. And so that type of honest, speaking the truth in love, never aggressive, but no longer passive, using an assertive tone of voice, but speaking it with compassion, is really going to hopefully break the tension. Now, it doesn't take much, just a quick conversation of something, but enough to break that tension can go a long way at decreasing a strained relationship.
All excellent ideas. I'm sure we can all use now in the quarantine time, but also in regular everyday life, I'm sure. I want to talk to you, Dr. Spencer, a little bit about just the whole overarching theme here about being positive and motivated and having that mental strength. So what are some ways that our athletes, our coaches, our volunteers, anyone listening on this call can keep that positivity and that motivation and that mental strength during quarantine?
Well, I really think this is a great opportunity for all of us to be really working on the mind. And there's two ways to do that. You can either do the inside out process, which is really one-on-one counseling, coaching. And that type of inner therapy kind of work is really beneficial. But that may not be a practicality for everybody. But what is a practicality for everybody is the outside in head knowledge. For example, have you read a book about the mind, about sports psychology? Have you watched YouTube videos? So for example, I personally have over 500 YouTube videos talking about the mind of an athlete. And yet there's people that have thousands more than me and far better people than me when it comes to this topic. So I'm constantly like looking at their stuff and watching their videos or listening to their podcast or reading their books. So it's really about being a lifelong learner. And that is the opportunity to set aside time every day. Maybe it's a YouTube video, podcast, or a book, but really get some good nuggets, some outside in head knowledge so that you can have more tools in your mental toolbox when the pressure actually does come, that you can manage the pre-race anxiety. You can bounce back from a disappointing performance a little bit faster because you've got more frustration management, or you can resolve an interpersonal conflict a little bit better because you've developed some communication skills that enable you to express yourself in a way that's assertive again, but not confrontational. All of these are ways that people can really develop their mind during a pandemic.
A lifetime learner, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Very, very important. Yes, no, that's very, very true, very true. So we also want to talk about kind of in that same theme here, you know, our athletes, when they are training for any type of sport, you know, they're developing skills. They're developing skills on discipline, obedience, resilience with their training. How can they use those type of skills, or maybe there's other skills that you would want to add? How can they use the types of skills they learn in sports training and apply it to surviving during this pandemic time?
Well, that's actually a big reason why I want to be on this webinar with you, is because I want to remind every athlete, coach out there that, look, if you're working in athletics, if you're in athletics, you've got a resiliency about you. The nature of being an athlete means that you have to learn how to deal with disappointment and setbacks and adversity. And so you do have a skill set that is going to directly translate into life. Maybe that some other people may not have that same type of experience. Now, having said that, for many of our athletes today who tend to be, you know, athletes vary in age, of course, but, you know, you tend to see a lot of athletes in that, 15 to 25-year-old window of time. The truth is this, adversity has been a part of your life, but not quite like we've seen right now. So this pandemic is really teaching all of us how to deal with a lot of things that we never had to deal with before, such as anxiety, right? What's going to happen financially? When can I return to school? What's going to happen if I do get sick? Or a family member gets sick. And so there's a lot of fear of the unknown. And so this pandemic is really putting us through a huge test in adversity. And I think that the experiences and techniques and skills you've learned by dealing with adversity in athletics can translate over. But sometimes it's not enough. And that's why mental health is such a big deal right now. That's why I'm doing this time with you today, because we got to put tools in your toolbox to better manage this kind of pressure cooker, so that we can thrive in athletics, but more importantly, thrive beyond.
Great tips for sure. We want to talk to you a little bit, Dr. Spencer, today. I know we mentioned it at the beginning of the call, that our athletes right now are doing some virtual training for our first ever virtual summer games. So could you offer any advice for our athletes as they are preparing for this virtual games, this virtual competition? I'm not sure if any of the athletes you work with professionally are doing any types of virtual training or virtual events right now, but just wondered if you could give us some tips.
Well, I think that the advantage of training in your home conditions is this. You could use a technique called anchoring. And anchoring is basically when you mark something with a connection to a sports psychology technique. So for example, if you're going to go out for a run, what if you made some signs up and you anchored them right where you want them to be, And you put them, so when you see them, it reminds you of a message of like clear mind, better performance, or you got this, you can do this, or you know, your mom and dad love you, whatever it may be, or to breathe. So having the ability to put signs and motivation around us while we train, and especially while we compete, is going to be really helpful. I mean, imagine if people took chalk and wrote on the concrete, on the pavement, on the asphalt, messages of encouragement. I mean, what would that do for you? And so we can't do that during normal conditions, but while you're training at home and competing virtually, anchoring can go a really long way to helping you feel a lot better emotionally.
Awesome, awesome. And on that note of feeling better and doing great things and feeling a little bit more positive during this, can you tell us about any positives that you have seen? You kind of talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to see if you wanted to elaborate a little more on positives coming out of the quarantine.
Well, one of the biggest positives coming out of the quarantine is simply this. If I talk to most people pre-pandemic and ask how they were feeling, they say they feel tired and their lives are just too busy. And now most people are saying, no, actually, I feel pretty well rested and I'm not busy. It's actually been quite enjoyable. And therefore, athletes' bodies in particular are really getting a chance to heal without that kind of pounding and that grind. It's not that athletes were overtraining, although many were. It's more that they weren't getting the rest and recovery necessary to match the level of training. But now people are able to get a lot more rest and recovery. And so that really has helped us overall feel really good. So I believe that one of the best parts that's come out of the pandemic, one big positive, is that most people are actually getting more rest than they ever have in their lifetime. And that's translating into better mental health and ultimately physical performance.
Great, great, wonderful. Well, that was a lot of great information. Thank you so much for all of that, Dr. Spencer. We're going to actually take some time now to open up for some questions. We have had some athletes send questions into the chat box, so we are going to kind of go through that and see what questions we can find and see if we can get you to answer as many as possible during the remaining of our time here.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay, so on the idea of thinking positive, I know there was a question in here about positive thinking. Somebody had asked about, can you quote unquote talk yourself into positive thinking?
Absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. Studies say we use 200 words to up to 1,200 words per minute with our self-talk. And many athletes will tell you that they're pretty hard on themselves and they're a little critical. So here's one of the best things an athlete can do to help with positive self-talk. Become an artist. Exactly. I want you to get out the paints and some paper, because if you're painting or doing any art is really the exercise of not being judgmental, not criticizing yourself or what you're creating, and also to visualize and see what you're actually trying to produce. So one of the best things to be an athlete is to be an artist, because it really helps with your positive self-talk and trying to not be so hard and harsh and critical of yourself.
Wonderful, wonderful. We have some more questions here. One question is, how do you assure an athlete that Special Olympics will one day be back to physical engagement?
Well, you can't, and that's the harsh reality, is that, you know, we want to know that everything is going to go back to the way that it was, but that's simply not the case. What we have to understand is that we don't know what the future holds, and that's really hard. That being said, it does make us feel more grateful for what we do have at the moment. And the attitude of gratitude is really important here during the pandemic, because the attitude of gratitude for what you do have right now leads to the optimal emotion for peak performance, which is excitement. And so with more gratitude, you have more excitement. With more excitement, you've got a wellspring of positive emotions for today, living life for today. And so now, having said all that, yeah, I do believe that we're going to figure this out, and something like the Special Olympics is definitely going to survive and thrive post-pandemic. I just don't know when that may be. But I do think it is best to hope for the best, plan for the worst, and worst meaning like longevity, that this may be 12 months, this may be 18 months that we're all living like this. I hope it's not, but I do think mentally it is important to think of this more of a marathon. So I do believe, though, that there's going to come a day when everyone will be able in sports to compete side by side and have family there cheering them on in person again.
Wonderful, wonderful words of advice. Thank you so much. We have another question here from one of our athletes, Garen Burgett. He would like to know, how does having a healthy mind help an athlete be better at their sport? I know we talked a little bit about that, but I was wondering if you can kind of summarize how being mentally strong will make you into a better athlete.
Well, it's about relentless optimism. And so with more mental tools in your toolbox, with being more mentally strong, you have a relentless optimism. And that relentless optimism is very, very important when you're fatiguing and you're emotionally breaking down, physically breaking down. That relentless optimism is going to hang in there a little bit longer. And quite frankly, that may be the difference between, first or fourth, is like who just had that ability to still stay optimistic. Because isn't that the essence of sports, right? You just want to compete and break each other down physically. And when we break down physically, we break down emotionally. But if we're able to just hang in there a little bit longer emotionally because our minds are clearer, or we have more tools in the toolbox, then consequently we can actually endure a little bit longer. And that is the difference a lot of times between first or last. Yeah.
Another question here that we have is, how can we help those who are struggling with all of the event cancellations right now, with all of the different sports that had to cancel through the sports seasons? I know you work with several universities, so I know they probably had their spring sports seasons be canceled or postponed as well. How do we help people struggling with those cancellations and deal with this unknown?
Well, one of the best parts about the pandemic is that it's forcing us to have new outlets. For many of us, sports was the outlet. But if you don't have sports, then what do you do to let out tension? And consequently, it's forcing many of us to develop hobbies. And so it's important to let it flow and let it go emotionally. It's okay to cry and vent and be upset about the loss and mourn the loss. That's healthy, that's good. But at the same time, because this is going to be going on for a while and there's going to be different disappointments, it becomes very important to develop new hobbies. For example, I mentioned art. And maybe you want to think about art as a new hobby. Or maybe you want to maybe consider reading a book and getting into reading. Reading is a wonderful hobby that you could have. Or, it's beautiful conditions here in Pennsylvania this time of year. So maybe you want to actually think about planting some tomatoes and work in a garden a little bit. Anything that have an outlet to let out the tension is the way to navigate this.
Great, great. We have another question from an athlete, Caitlin Barron. She is telling us that she trains in multiple sports from Center County, and sometimes she visualizes herself swimming or running races before competition. She wants to know, is there any evidence that athletes who visualize themselves in their competitions, will they do better in their competitions because of that?
Caitlin, that's a brilliant question. And I've seen a lot of evidence that actually suggests that it really does. And so it's hard to be very conclusive, because visualization can vary for what it actually looks like, from guided meditation to hypnosis, to one just kind of quietly closing their eyes and thinking through their performance. And of course, it does vary sport to sport. But here's the bottom line. The body will achieve what the mind believes. and the body is looking for a mental image in the mind to follow. So if you continuously think about all the things you're doing wrong, well, then the body kind of like uses that as the first image it kind of comes up with. But if you can positively create images in your mind by visualizing, then the body can actually use that as its image to follow. So you see yourself performing really well and feeling strong while you're competing, then that's interestingly what happens. The body will achieve what the mind believes. And so it becomes a very necessary exercise for every athlete to really visualize success in order to create the mental images. And so can we prove it scientifically, reliably, and validly in all sports for all ages? Well, that'd be a little bit difficult. But what we do know across the board is it is very, very helpful for sure.
All right, great. Another question from one of our coaches. How do I motivate my fellow athletes to do virtual summer games? This might be a big question to ask.
Yeah. Well, I think that the answer is this. It's about intrinsic motivation. And a lot of times in life, we are extrinsically motivated. You know, we like the social part. You know, we like to go places because we like to interact with people. And without that social part, without that extrinsic part, what we're really left with is the internal intrinsic motivation. And so it becomes about, you know, tell me why you love this, why you love to compete, or what do you love about the experience. And so for a coach to cultivate the love within the athletes for what their event may be, that's what we really got to focus in on. And so have conversations and ask and re-ask and find ways to help cultivate the intrinsic drive. Why do you love this? What do you get out of this? And really focus on that. That's going to be, and that's a different reason for everybody, or reasons for everybody. But I think that's really the angle I'd encourage a coach to come at it.
Great, great. We have some more here as well. Somebody asked, how do I mentally challenge an athlete that thinks internally that they know more than the coach?
Yeah, great question. And so, quite frankly, a lot of times that comes from the overbearing parent who is at the kitchen table saying that they believe that they know more than the coach. And that's usually where an athlete is internalizing those messages. And that's usually where, if you really want to solve the problem, you got to get the weed out of the garden. You got to go to the root. And the root oftentimes is a parent whose heart is in the right place, but their head isn't. And so somehow they erroneously believe that they know more than the coach. And that's probably just a message to encourage the coach to go to the parent on that one.
Another question somebody asked was, it's a little confusing, so I'm going to try and read it correctly here. How does an athlete mentally relax when through their training they are prepared and mentally know they will perform and break a record they've been training for?
Yeah, so basically it's like you know you're ready to break a record, but game day comes and all of a sudden, you know, you have a little anxiety. And so the key right there is simply this. Every athlete should have a station, a playlist of relaxing piano music with no lyrics. And so there's a piano player named Danny Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. And every athlete I work with ends up having some Danny Wright music that they listen to up until about an hour before they compete. And up until that point in time, Danny's music is going to push your nervous system into a parasympathetic state. That just basically means a very relaxed state, but not too relaxed. And so this kind of music will help calm the nerves, take the edge off, and conserve the precious emotional energy that sometimes gets lost on game day by being too nervous.
Another question I found kind of interesting here. This is a good question. Dr. Spencer, do you find anger, when correctly channeled, can spur an athlete to do better? Example was run a little faster, things like that.
Yeah, Yeah, anger is a great spark, but a terrible fuel. So it's a wonderful spark to get fired up, and it's wonderful, but you can't run a whole race angry. It's negative emotion. It's like when a space ship goes up and the rockets go up in outer space. You know, there's different levels of fuel source, and anger is one of the best fuel sources in the very beginning. But you can't use that same fuel source for the whole trip. You know, so it's a good spark, but a bad fuel.
That's a great analogy to go off of. I'm looking here to see if anyone else, oh, there's still more coming in. How do you keep coaches motivated even without the pandemic?
Well, coaches are very selfless, and they need parents to really organize and say thank you. And so coaches are people that are willing to give. And so I do think that it's very important, if you're a parent listening, to say, hey, what have we done for our coach? And it could be a simple card. It could be, you know, a little care package you send. But we now more than ever, we got to thank people. And so coaches need to be appreciated. If a coach feels appreciated, they'll do so much. But if they're not feeling appreciated, eventually they say, I'm not sure why do I still want to do this? And so appreciation is the key.
Someone else wants to know, I think it's a personal question for you, Dr. Spencer, if you've ever gotten an adrenaline rush during a competition and performed better because of it.
Yeah, I can tell you, you know, I grew up in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and we had a high school rivalry game against Easton. It's if you look it up, it's one of the biggest high school rivalry games in the country each year. About 15,000 fans will attend it. And I clearly remember one particular play where I was a defensive back, and I was covering a guy who ended up playing in the NFL. And my job was to cover him all game. And one time I jumped so high that I found myself like literally flying through the air. And it's kind of a weird thing, but in that brief moment, I was like, I've never been this high in the air before. But with that adrenaline rush at that moment, I just found myself excelling way beyond what I thought was possible. And I guess that's really the beauty of sports, right? I guess that's why I love positive psychology so much, is because there's so much more inside of every one of us. And under the right conditions, we can actually access that. And when we do, it's a beautiful thing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, Dr. Spencer, I know we have questions coming in like crazy. The athletes have a lot of questions here, but we do have to close up our time here with you. I was wondering if there was any final remarks. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Any final remarks you want to give to our athletes or our coaches, parents, anyone on the call, just kind of summarizing what we talked about today about mental health and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say to you, first and foremost, everyone watching, listening, thank you. You value this enough. And so what I would say is this, like, get on the path and stay on the path. And what that means is there's a lot of great resources out there. And so check out the YouTube videos I mentioned. I wrote a book, Mind of the Athlete, Clear Mind, Better Performance. And maybe that book, which you can pick up on the website or Amazon, would be of value and help to you. Go ahead and look for podcasts and Mind of the Athlete social media. Gosh, there's so many videos and articles and interviews that I've been doing lately, and they end up there. So check it out. What I'm trying to say to you is that don't let this be something that was really cool today and it's gone tomorrow. Get on the path, get plugged in to mental health, sports psychology, look at all the resources that are out there that are available for you. And I believe that this could be a time in your life when you maybe really pivot and make mental health an even more important part of your daily walk. And I hope I inspired you in that direction.
Well, Dr. Spencer, I can definitely say you inspired a lot of us here today. We do thank you for everything you've done today and given us your time and all your expert advice. It's been really great. And I think the last comment you kind of said there, this is a pivotal time. I think this is the time where, you know, this time will determine the champions, you know, determine who's going to stay strong mentally. And like you said, mental health is the beginning of it all.
Yes, it is. And so thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you so much any of you who sent a question as well. So I'm sorry I didn't have the time to answer them all, but maybe I'll come back. Maybe we can do this again sometime.
That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. So on that note as well, for everyone on the call, we have, if you look at your chat box, we have actually included Dr. Spencer's website there. There's a link. This chat box will close up after the call ends, so make sure you click on that link now to have it in your browser. If not, we will make sure we share that link as well, and we'll check back with Dr. Spencer to see if there's any other resources that he would like us to share as well. We are also wanting to note that SOI also has some resources as well. It's called Strong Minds, and we'll share that as well. That is an excellent part of the Special Olympics website that has a lot of resources with mental health as well for our athletes, and it talks about developing those coping skills and different strategies throughout this time. So we'll also share that as well. That's in the chat box right now. You'll see that appear. Again, click on the link now if you'd like it for today right now, or we'll make sure that we include that link in our email that we send later to everyone else. And as you can see on your screen now, if you have any questions, again, Kristen and Haley are on these calls right now, but we do have a direct web address that you can answer all your questions that will be answered quicker if you go through the SOPA News at specialolympicspa.org. So SOPA NEWS, SOPA News at specialolympicspa.org. So make sure you use that web address if you have any particular questions about these webinars or anything that we've shared. This concludes our Team Tuesdays webinar. If you have any more questions, again, send them to that web address. We want to also remind you that these calls are recorded and later posted to our SOPA YouTube channel, where you can view later and share with others. We want to thank everyone today for joining our call. We hope you enjoyed our guest speaker, and we do want to thank Dr. Spencer for presenting today all his valuable information. It was really great to have him, and a lot of feedback from others, so I know a lot of you enjoyed our call today. We will join you on our next webinar in 2 weeks. That'll be on Tuesday, June 9th. Until then, stay healthy and stay safe.